For most of the 30 years that the Pokemon series has existed, we on the outside have had quite the opaque look into its game's developments. Regarding the creatures that have brought the franchise its massive cultural and financial success, we have at best an educated guess for how most of them were designed and named. Some names are pretty obvious, others have multiple ambiguous layers to them that are impossible to dissect exactly without asking whoever came up with it, and Dugong is called Dugong because it's a dugong. I don't know what seal is meant to be though. Translation is complicated, with factors like vocabulary differences, personal choices made by individual localizers, and absolutely dissimilar pools of culture to reference between regions. The name for a Pokemon can be completely different from language to language, trainer to trainer. This is just a cursory glance into some of the amusing or interesting choices made when translating and localizing species and move names from Japanese to English. There are hundreds of examples I could have chosen. Diving deep into the complications of one specific evolution line, the species Kirikizan became Bisharp in English, while its pre-evolution Komatana became Pawniard. In English, the motif of chess pieces seems very intentional, with the pawn promoting into a tall, thin, and stronger bishop that eventually becomes leader and king. Komatana also seemingly references chess, as its name is straightforwardly a combination of kogatana, knife, and koma, which is a blanket term for pieces in board games. Kirikizan, however, has no clear allusions to chess or shogi, sharing no similarities with any terms or piece names, and instead just being a combination of two words related to cutting. What's the origin of this discrepancy? The best guess we can come up with is that the Koma in Pawniard's Japanese name comes from the concept that they're ordered around by Bisharp like board game pieces, rather than any intentional allusions to chess. In interviews with Ken Sugimori, he never mentions chess or shogi, only discussing how they were inspired by urban bandits and how Bisharp orders Pawniard to cling onto opponents with its stomach blades. The creative leap that resulted in all three members of the evolution line having names involving specific chess pieces seems to come from whoever was responsible for Bisharp's English name, deciding Kirikizan should maintain the line's already dubious connection to chess established with Pawniard. All this is to say the translation and localization of names in the series can be very fickle, arbitrary, and result in notable additions or losses in identity. The Alakazam line no longer references specific stage magicians, Tinkaton's name no longer involves blacksmithing, and Kangaskhan gains a nonsensical reference to the Mongol Empire. Others fared just fine, and the wordplay stars aligned to enable all elements of the Japanese name to be retained. Translation is complicated. Some Pokemon names require a lot less explanation, getting translated more or less directly and working just fine. Typhlosion in both English and Japanese is a portmanteau of explosion and typhoon, which is aided by the word typhoon coincidentally sounding very similar in both languages. Glimmora swaps the glim in its name out for Kira Kira, an onomatopoeia for sparkling, and keeps the word flora at the end. Dozens of species, including most legendaries and notably Pikachu and its clones, maintain their Japanese wordplay-derived names in English or across all languages. As an example, Ho-Oh in Japanese is Ho-Oh, the Japanese word for Feng Huang or Chinese phoenix. Names for legendaries are maintained internationally, probably for brand consistency, since there are a billion movies featuring them, one for every lion. The parallel to these are the many Japanese names that are English puns and arrive unchanged into the English games. There are also legendaries with uniform names like Latios and Xerneas who take from languages other than English and Japanese, ending up equally foreign to all languages. Something that happened quite a bit in Kanto as the opposite of this was a Pokemon's original name being an unmodified English word and localizers opting to completely change it. Beedrill is Spear, Sandshrew is Sand, Scyther is Strike, and Magnemite and Magneton are Coil and Rare Coil. The most notable examples, however, are definitely the legendary birds, who not only had their elemental words changed, but also had words from a completely different language added. On the other hand, some names are slightly modified but still convey basically the same idea or pun. Esper is Nyaspa in Japanese, keeping the reference to the term ESP but using nya, which as an onomatopoeia is more so equivalent to meow rather than purr. Gudra is Numerugon, which is also dragon appended to a word relating to stickiness, in this case numeru, which is the verb for being slippery. Vanilla is Banipuchi, keeping the vanilla at the start of its name but swapping the suffix ite for the French petit, which is a fairly common loanword in Japan. Honchko is Don Karasu, literally Don Crow, and the only change made when localizing was swapping Don for Honcho. Many names gain or lose a lot more information in the process of localization, ending up with very different wordplay. Drifloon in English is just drifting balloon, but its original name Fuante is a multi-layered pun with fuafua, fluffy, Fuante, unstable, and Fusen, balloon. The Hydreigon line keeps the 1-2-3 pattern in both languages, but instead of ein, zwei, drei, the Japanese names use mono and die from Latin and then san. Hydreigon itself is still basically 3 dragon, but it lacks the defining reference to the word hydra that it has in English. Dino and Zweilous are just 1-head and 2-head respectively, with no lizard or dragon related puns to be found. Braviary's Japanese name is a portmanteau of war and eagle, but the English localizers chose to create a completely new name for whatever reason. Possibly just because Wargle sounds awkward, or maybe it was the Iraq War, I don't know. One of the most puzzling abilities in the series is Bulletproof, which allegedly blocks quote-unquote ball and bomb moves. There's no consistent vibe to what counts as one, and you're just gonna have to remember the list of 26 to know what you can switch your Komo-O in on. Aura Sphere, Flash Cannon, and Armor Cannon all use basically the same animation, but only the first of those is blocked by the ability. Why does this count Gyro Ball and Beak Blast, two attacks that aren't bullet-like in the slightest, but not those two? Why block Ice Ball but not Rollout even though they're fucking identical? They're the exact same move, just with a different type. Well, that's because Bulletproof was only introduced in X and Y's Chestnut signature ability, and moves were retroactively classed as quote, ball, bomb, etc., based on their Japanese names. This counted anything involving Tama, ball/bullet, Dan or Bakudan, bomb, hole, cannon shot, the English words ball and bomb, but not cannon, unless that move is Beak Blast, because we don't want two cannon being too good. And also just Roku Brasto, because fuck it, this is a game for babies, who gives a shit? A surprising amount of discrepancies arise specifically from swordplay or fist-fighting techniques being deemed too niche to reference directly. Aerial Ace is a flying type move because its original name is a pun on Tsubame Kaeshi, literally swallow return, a sword technique pioneered by Sengoku period samurai Sasaki Kojiro, where the user quickly swings down to bait their opponent, followed by a rapid return upward to regain the initiative. The obscurity of this technique in English resulted in localizers coming up with the name Aerial Ace, which explains why it's a flying type move, but still not why Dugtrio can learn it and not Flygon. Another move that only makes sense as being flying type in Japanese is Mirror Move, whose name Oumu Gaeshi means parrot response or mimicry, the tendency of both children and birds like parrots to copy sentences they hear. That's why it's only learned by birds, despite being mechanically similar to moves with much wider distributions like Copycat and Me First. One bird that learns it is Mandibuzz, and I'm obliged to say that its name in Japanese seems to be Volgina, which is not actually that, unfortunately. When you read the two words side by side in Japanese kana, you can see they aren't actually similar. Burigina more likely comes from Regina, the Latin word for queen, and the resemblance its Romaji form gains to a specific English word is an unfortunate but funny coincidence. Going back to the actual topic of fighting, Sucker Punch is a generic term for a cheap or unfair surprise attack, which, in context as a dark-type move, is a pretty fitting translation. The only issue is the ability Iron Fist, introduced a generation later, which boosts every other move with punch in its name and leaves English speakers confused when they find out that Sucker Punch isn't counted. Also relating to Iron Fist, Headlong Rush is affected by it, despite being shown to Western fans as a basic charge or tackle. This has to do with its origin in sumo wrestling, with Buchi Kamashi referring to the initial lunge and hand grappling of a match. It's likely a ground-type attack as a pun, since the Chika in the middle can also mean underground. There's also the fact that 3 years before the move's introduction in Legends Arceus, Charizard's Forward Smash and Ultimate was given the same name, although there's no way you can learn the move Curly in Scarlet and Violet, which is a real travesty. Charizard is so neglected, but Game Freak won't spare it this one little move pool buff. The hatred they have for it is unreal. Anyway, unlike Bulletproof, the ability Sharpness fits the moves affected by it quite well. There are no super strange exclusions or inclusions in English, with 2 exceptions. One is the aforementioned Aerial Ace, and the other is Population Bomb. In Japanese, the move is called Nezumi-zan, which is a double entendre. Nezumi is mouse, and combined with zan, math operation, refers to exponential growth of a population like breeding mice. However, Zan can also mean decapitation, which is why it gets boosted by Sharpness, despite that not being one of Mousehold's abilities. Another move affected by Sharpness is Cut, which in English is treated as a generic swipe with a blade or talon. However, its Japanese name is Iyaigiri, a technique where one pulls out their sword and smoothly swipes the target before putting it back in its scabbard. Another Iron Fist enigma is Comet Punch, which is a name Japanese devs and English localizers both came up with independently for 2 different moves in different generations. The original name of the RBY normal type attack just means continuous punching, but that sounds lame, so it was renamed Comet Punch in English. Unfortunately for some Nintendo of America employee in 2002, they discovered that Metagross and Clefairy's new signature move is called Comet Punch and had to create a new name from scratch. Meteor Mash is a good translation, but it's interesting that the comets aligned for it to exist because 2 people on the opposite side of the world came up with the same name at different times. Lastly, Guillotine is mostly learned by bugs and crustaceans because its Japanese name is literally Pincer Guillotine, and that's also why none of its attack animations are allusions to the straight and heavy drop of a real-life guillotine blade. Phalanx and its signature move No Retreat reference 2 different heroic desperate battles of antiquity in English and Japanese in a way I think is really cool. No Retreat combined with a name reminiscent of the Greek phalanx conjures images of the mythologized Battle of Thermopylae, where an outnumbered force of Greeks, most famously its contingent of 300 Spartans, held off a gargantuan Persian army at a narrow mountain pass before being overrun, choosing to romantically go down fighting rather than surrender. In Japanese, the move's name is a classical Chinese idiom, in this case Haisui no Jin, literally army with its back to the water, evoking a famous last stand of East Asian history where Commander Han Xin and his inexperienced army fought between mountains with a river behind them and one outnumbered 7-1. That name is one of the many expressions based on his life and career, since he was a key figure in founding one of the most important Chinese dynasties and has been studied and celebrated for the past 2,200 years. That tradition has continued in one of the defining cultural works of Asia of the past millennium, Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield. If you're like me and have wasted thousands of hours of your life thinking about this series, you probably have developed a sense of everything in it just making sense and not being worth doubting. A fire type using Outrage can't heat itself up to beat a steel type because Outrage is a dragon attack. Are you stupid? Ghosts are immune to basic punches and kicks except when they're done in an evil way, in which case they're super effective. U-turn is a bug type move because it just is, okay? Well, that last one actually has a reason that's lost in translation. Its original name is Tonbo Gaedi, which is the third time that kanji has shown up in this video. It just means a round trip without breaks, but the Tonbo in its name comes from the word for dragonfly because of how they zip around quickly without pausing to change direction. Now you can keep that in mind every time your opponent's Dragapult U-turns out into their Corviknight. Corviknight used Defog. Corviknight used U-turn. Your opponent sent out Landorus. Landorus clicked U-turn. I put it in the thumbnail so I have to talk about it, but the typical translation you'll see of Light That Burns the Sky's original name is Heaven's Scorching Light of Destruction, which many people say sounds way cooler. In the Japanese games, it's one of the few attacks that use kanji in their name rather than just kana like the vast majority of moves. Breaking it down piece by piece, Ten is sky or heaven, Kogasu is a verb for burning, Metsubo is destruction or extinction, and Hikari is light. Heaven's Scorching Light of Destruction is a very literal translation, although I could nitpick it and say it's ambiguous if the clauses are broken down like this or this. The English name is a valid translation, carrying over every aspect except destruction, probably for character limit reasons. I'd say the extra coolness factor that Heaven's Scorching Light of Destruction has comes from it A, being longer, and B, the more dramatic choices of heaven and scorch for those words. The translation of Ten as heaven is very common, dates back centuries, but it's flawed and lacking nuance since the Christian afterlife isn't one of the primary connotations of that word in Chinese or Japanese, unlike English. It has a lot of different meanings, including the traditional Chinese formless creator deity, the realm of the gods, the sky, outer space, and fate or destiny, but distinctly not an afterlife realm where capital G God hangs out. That mismatch in connotation suggests the idea of destroying heaven and the all-powerful God, making the more literal translation seem a bit cooler and way more blasphemous than the move is intended to be. Light That Burns the Sky is also one of the few Z-move names that doesn't feature alliteration, although it's worth noting that none of them intentionally have it in Japanese or other languages, even the ones with English phrases as names. Snorlax in Japanese is Kabigon, an inside joke from the inconceivable time when Pokemon was a low-profile game in development hell made by a no-name studio with like 20 people for what was deemed a dead console. Game designer Nishino Koji was endearingly compared to Kirby for the massive portions he would eat, and combined with how often he'd fall asleep afterward, that provided the inspiration for a bear-like Pokemon in a constant food coma. In Black and White 2, he makes an appearance at the Game Freak office in Castelia City, sporting a team with Snorlax as its ace and giving you leftovers if you win. Several moves have been changed to remove religious language. Inferno is Rengoku, Purgatory, Rain Dance is Rain Prayer, which is why it's not affected by Dancer, and Serene Grace was changed from Heavenly Blessing. Submission is Jigoku Guruma, typically translated as Hell Wheel, and despite the very high intelligence and worldliness of the 90s Pokemon as satanic crowd, they never cited this original name as evidence of that.
The children are developing relationships with all these Pokemon creatures, but why should they carry these monsters in their pocket? So Pokemon is a game. Pokemon World is a world of the demonic, of the satanic. But while you might not take it quite seriously, I assure you that demons take it quite seriously.
One thing that's been consistent across the series' life has been designers and writers loving their kanji puns. From the beginning, Fire Blast was intended to be shaped like the kanji for big, in reference to Kyoto's Gozan no Okuribi, or Daimonji festival. There's a visual gag during episode 59 of Indigo League where Ash's Charizard throws the attack in the air and it shrinks into the kanji for medium and then small. Mega Pyro has been clowned on relentlessly for its design and stats, but those people just can't appreciate the utter genius of having its main be shaped like Honno, the kanji for large flame and also the word for the fire type itself. Bulbasaur's name is slightly infamous for being a very dumb pun. It's Fushigi Dane, literally mysterious seed, but also a double entendre if, instead of Tane, seed, you hear the last two kana as Da, Ne. Ne is a very common end-of-sentence particle that gives an air of seeking agreement, similar to adding right at the end of an English sentence. It's used both for decreasing the certainty of a sentence to soften a possible incorrect statement, and to provide a self-evident quality, like using rhetorical questions in English. Fushigi dane can be roughly translated as, "It's strange, isn't it?" Meaning Indigo League is filled with that stupid vermin saying its name with a slightly different intonation as a dumb dad joke. The part dragon typing that Ampharos gains upon Mega Evolving comes from a Kanji homophone pun. Its name Denryu is ambiguous, but the main thing it evokes in Japanese is the word for electric current with the same pronunciation. However, Ryu is also the word for dragon, so that's why Mega Ampharos, that fucking mid-ass potential mon what does he even do fraud, gains dragon typing. In 2019, a collaboration between Pokemon and various prefectures on Japan's northeastern coast to promote tourism started, and the choice of mascot for some came from puns involving their names. Iwate Prefecture's name is literally Boulder Hand, so they picked Geodude. Slowpoke, Yadon, was chosen by Kagawa, a prefecture well known for its udon. Fukushima's name literally translates to Lucky Island, so they picked Chansey, whose Japanese name is Raki from English Lucky. Guerrilla tactics doesn't make much sense in English. Hitting harder at the cost of being less flexible is the exact opposite of how guerrilla movements fight, which is by using espionage, speed, and hidden run operations to make an occupation costly without engaging a stronger force in direct battle. This comes from the Japanese name also being a pun on the word gorilla, specifically the 4-character idiom Gori Muchu, meaning confusion and not knowing what to do. It literally means lost in a fog of 5 ri, with ri being a traditional Japanese unit equal to about 4 kilometers. Muchu, spelled with a different pair of kanji, can mean obsessed, literally in the middle of a dream, so Gori Muchu is being fixated on something or in a trance state, like an angry gorilla. A very common form of Japanese wordplay is using numbers as code for words, called goro awase. Japanese people are familiar with 3 different sets of names for the numbers 0 to 10, one that's been part of the language since prehistory, the Ichini-san names from China, and also English. That leaves 33 different options to make puns with. For example, the Twitter handle of Yotsuba's author is 428 in tweet. 4 is commonly read as yo, English 2 tsu, and 8 is ha, which can change to ba based on centuries of complicated linguistics, so in this case 428 is meant to be a stand-in for Yotsuba. Mario Day, March 10th, is also Oshawa and Sandshrew Day because their names Mijumaru and Sando can both correspond to 310. The Pokemon Company goes all out for this day, even making unique Sandshrew-themed trains for Totori Prefecture in 2024. One very hidden example of this in Pokemon involves Dekadui. Its Japanese name is Junaipa, and if you stretch your imagination, you can hear Junana, 10-7, and this possibly is the reason why it has exactly 107 base attack. This is supported by its Hisuian form having 112 attack. God damn it. As mentioned earlier, all these examples are just a tiny slice of the thousands of localization decisions made by English translators across the decades. It's a very difficult art form, and I want to express appreciation for all the hard work that has gone into it. Japanese to English is an especially complicated process, and altogether they've done a great job. Major thanks to Bulbapedia for compiling much of this information. Having a centralized location with all the names, pictures, likely inspirations, list of move categories, and links to interviews I referenced made this video possible, where it wouldn't have been otherwise. And also, thank you for watching. I'd be grateful, very, very grateful for any likes or subscribes or positive comments. This altogether took about 50 hours, which is basically the same as my first video, despite being 4 times as long. I've put in about 35 hours in just the past 6 days, so I'm going to take a break for a few days before uploading the behind-the-scenes director commentary thing. Thank you.